It's a funny thing about silence. For most of my life, it was a rare commodity. The noise of a career, the beautiful chaos of raising two children with my wife Martha, the constant hum of a life being lived. I craved silence back then. I'd sit in my old armchair after everyone was asleep, just to hear the house settle, to hear my own thoughts for a minute. Now at 79, silence is my most constant companion, and I have come to despise it. It's a heavy, suffocating blanket, woven from the threads of absence, the absence of Martha, gone 7 years now, the absence of my children, Robert and Susan, who have mostly forgotten I exist. My world has shrunk to these four walls, this chair, the flickering blue light of the television, and the ghosts of my memories. The silence is deepest in the mornings, before the sun has fully committed to the day. The house is a museum of a life that feels like it belonged to someone else. There's a photo on the mantel of Robert, my son, maybe 10 years old, grinning with a gap in his teeth, holding up a little league trophy I helped him win. Next to it, Susan, my daughter, at her college graduation, her face full of a future that would eventually lead her far away from here. They're strangers to me now, those smiling faces. They are artifacts from a different era. Robert, he's the responsible one. He lives just 40 minutes away, in a sprawling house I helped him buy. His responsibility extends to a phone call once a month, a clinical check-in to ensure the asset, me, is still functioning. The conversation is always the same. How are you feeling, Dad? Taking your pills? Need anything? The questions are hollow, a checklist he needs to complete, to assuage some vestige of guilt. Susan is somewhere else. Last I heard, it was Oregon. She sends a Christmas card, most years. In this curated silence, one sound became my anchor to the living world, the familiar squeak of the mail slot in my front door, around 11:15 a.m. That sound meant Carlos was here. Carlos is my mailman. He's a good kid, maybe 28, with a smile that seems to genuinely reach his eyes, and a habit of calling everyone sir or ma'am like he was raised in a different time. He's the one person I see every single day. He's the only person who takes the time. He'll stand on the porch for a minute, especially on sunny days, and ask, "How are you really doing, Mr. Miller?" He'll talk about the weather, or a funny dog he saw on his route, or how his grandmother, his abuela he calls her, is driving him crazy trying to teach him her secret recipe for flan. For those 5 minutes, the silence in my house recedes. I am not a ghost. I am Douglas Miller, a man having a conversation on his porch. Last week, the silence returned with a vengeance. On Monday, no mail. I thought nothing of it. Junk mail has its own mysterious schedule. Tuesday, the same. The squeak of the mail slot never came. By Wednesday, a cold knot was tightening in my stomach. It was a primal fear, the kind you get when a fundamental law of your universe is broken. The sun rises in the east, the tide comes in, and Carlos delivers the mail. When he didn't, it felt like the world had tilted on its axis. On Thursday, I was sitting by the window, watching, when his familiar blue and white truck pulled up. But instead of walking to my door, he just sat there for a long moment. Then he got out, not with a bundle of letters, but with a single official-looking piece of paper in his hand. He met me on the porch, his usual bright expression clouded with concern. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice low, "something's not right." He handed me the paper. It was a change of address confirmation from the United States Postal Service. Effective 3 days ago, all mail addressed to Douglas Miller at 124 Elm Street was to be redirected. The new address was one I knew by heart. It was Robert's house. I stared at the form, my mind refusing to process the words. My name, my address, and an authorization signature at the bottom. It was a good forgery. I'll give him that. The loop of the deed was almost perfect. The slant of the EM was close, but it wasn't mine. It was the signature of someone who had seen mine on 1,000 birthday checks and loan documents, but who didn't understand the specific pressure I put on the pen, the small hesitation before the final R. Carlos was watching my face. I knew it. He said softly. When it came through the system, I had a bad feeling. I've been holding your mail at the station for the last couple of days. I know your handwriting. Mr. Miller, I see it on your outgoing envelopes every week. This isn't it. He pointed to the signature line. He didn't get the curl on this right. You always do that. He recognized it. This young man, this relative stranger, knew my signature better than my own son, thought he needed to. The violation of it was so profound, it felt like a physical blow. It wasn't just about bills and junk mail. It was about my name, my home, my existence. My son had, with a simple fraudulent form, attempted to erase me from my own life, to reroute my very identity to a mailbox under his control. He didn't even have the courage or the decency to tell me. He just did it, assuming I was too old, too tired, too irrelevant to notice. He assumed the silence I lived in was the silence of defeat. He was wrong. The moments after Carlos left were a blur of cold, quiet rage. I sat in my armchair, the change of address form trembling in my hand. The house suddenly felt different, violated. It was no longer a sanctuary of memories. It was a crime scene. Every object seemed to mock me. The phone on the side table, silent. The photos on the mantel, their smiles now feeling like lies. Robert's smug little face, holding that trophy. I had paid for the uniform, the bat, the league fees. I had driven him to every single practice, and this was the thanks. A forged signature, a quiet theft of my autonomy. My mind, a place that had become a swamp of foggy memories and television plots, suddenly sharpened. It was as if a lifetime of dormant files were being accessed, dusted off, and brought online. I am Douglas Miller. I spent 42 years as a senior auditor for a major accounting firm. I didn't just balance books, I dissected them. I found the lies hidden in the numbers, the tiny fraudulent details that unraveled entire empires of deceit. My job was to notice the curl on the cis, and I had been retired for so long, I had forgotten that man existed. Robert had forgotten too. The first wave of anger was hot and explosive. I wanted to smash something. I wanted to call him and scream, to let loose a torrent of 79 years of swallowed frustrations. But the auditor in me, the calm, methodical man who had faced down cheating executives and their high-priced lawyers, took over. Emotion is a liability, Douglas. Collect the facts, document the injustice, build your case. But before the auditor, the father had one last thing to say. I needed to hear it from him. I needed to give him one chance to undo it, to show a flicker of the sun I remembered. I picked up the phone, my fingers surprisingly steady as I dialed his number. He answered on the third ring, his voice brisk and impatient, the way it always was. "Dad, everything okay?" I kept my own voice level. "Robert, I need to ask you about my mail." There was a slight pause. Not a pause of surprise, but the pause of a man deciding which lie to tell. "Oh, that. Yeah, I've been meaning to call you." He sounded so casual, so dismissive. "Don't worry about it. It's just an administrative thing." "An administrative thing," I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "You filed a change of address form for me, Robert. You forged my signature." I heard him sigh, a sound of pure exasperation, the sound he used to make when I'd ask him to take out the trash as a teenager. "Dad, let's not be dramatic. Forged is such an ugly word. I just streamlined things. You're getting older. It's easy to miss a bill, to let things pile up. I'm just trying to help you, to make sure your affairs are in order. It's for your own good, for my own good." The three most dangerous words in the English language. They are the words tyrants use. They are the words of a jailer talking to his prisoner. It was the final patronizing nail in the coffin of our relationship. "It's mail fraud, Robert," I said, my voice dropping. "It's a federal offense." This time he laughed. A short, sharp, barking laugh full of condescension. "Oh, come on, Dad. Don't be ridiculous. It's not a big deal. It's family. Who's going to care? The male police?" He chuckled again. "Look, I've got to run. I'm in the middle of something. We can talk about this later. Just relax. I've got it handled." And then he hung up. I stood there, holding the dead receiver, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. Who's going to care? That question echoed in the oppressive silence of my empty house. It was the core of it all, wasn't it? The central thesis of my son's argument. That I was a non-entity, a ghost in my own life whose affairs could be tidied up without his consent because, in the end, no one of consequence would care enough to stop him. The rage was gone now, replaced by something much colder, much heavier. It was the icy resolve of a man who has been pushed past the point of no return. My eyes fell on a picture of Martha, taken on our 40th anniversary. Her smile was so warm. On her deathbed, her voice a fragile whisper, she had made me promise. "Take care of the kids, Doug," she'd said, her hand frail in mine. "Keep the family together, especially Robbie. He acts tough, but he needs you." For 7 years I had held on to that promise like a sacrament. I had endured the missed holidays, the forgotten birthdays, the growing distance. I had poured money into Robert's life, the down payment on his house, the capital for his failed consulting business, the tuition for his children's private schools, all in the name of that promise. I was keeping my wife's last wish, but I realized now, with chilling clarity, that Martha would never have wanted this. She would not have wanted her memory to be used as a shield for disrespect and criminality. She would not have wanted me to be erased. I thought back to my last birthday just a few months ago. I had made a small cake, one of Martha's recipes. I sat at the kitchen table all day, waiting. The call finally came at nearly 10 o'clock at night. "Hey, Dad, happy birthday," Robert said, the sound of traffic in the background. "Listen, I'm swamped. Got a client dinner. We'll do something to celebrate soon, I promise." I knew soon was a lie. I ate a slice of cake alone, the sweetness of it turning to paste in my mouth. The memory, combined with the fresh wound of his laughter on the phone, solidified into something diamond hard in my chest. He mistook my silence for weakness. He mistook my grief for senility. He mistook my love for a resource to be exploited. It wasn't about revenge, not at first. It was about survival. It was about proving that I, Douglas Miller, still existed. But as his mocking question, "Who's going to care?" bounced around the walls of my skull, a new thought began to form. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. That evening, there was a knock on the door. It wasn't the demanding rap of my son. It was a softer, more hesitant knock. I opened it to find Carlos standing there, out of his uniform, holding a large manila folder. He looked worried. "Mr. Miller," he said, shifting his weight, "I'm sorry to bother you at home. I was worried about you after this morning. Did you speak to your son?" I just nodded, unable to find the words. I stepped back and gestured for him to come inside. He walked into my living room, his eyes taking in the quiet stillness of the place. "He thinks it's a joke," I finally managed to say, my voice raspy. "He told me not to be dramatic." Carlos's jaw tightened. "That's what they always say," he said, his voice quiet but full of a strange intensity.
They count on you feeling embarrassed.
"They count on you not wanting to make a scene." He opened the folder on my coffee table. Inside were several printed pages from a website. The header was stark and official: U.S. Postal Inspection Service. "What your son did, Mr. Miller, it is a big deal. A very big deal. It's called interference with mail. It's a felony. 18 U.S. Code Section 1702. They don't play around." I stared at the words, at the bold print detailing fines and imprisonment. It was real. It wasn't me being dramatic. Carlos leaned forward, his expression earnest. "My grandfather, my abuelo, he lived with us my whole life. My uncle, his youngest son, was his power of attorney. We all thought he was taking care of things, but he was taking things, draining his bank accounts, selling off his old tools, piece by piece. My abuelo was too proud to say anything. He didn't want to break the family apart. By the time we found out, it was too late. There was nothing left. It destroyed him. It destroyed our family. He looked at me, and I saw a profound sadness in his young eyes. I see my abuelo in you, Mr. Miller. I see a good man being taken for a ride by people who should be protecting him. I couldn't do anything back then. I was just a kid. But I'm not a kid anymore. He tapped the papers. They think you're just some old man who won't fight back. They think no one is watching, but I'm watching, and I'm a federal employee who has witnessed an attempt to commit mail fraud. The question your son should have asked wasn't who's going to care. It was who's going to testify. A switch flipped inside my head. The fog of grief and shock evaporated, replaced by the crystalline clarity of a legal and financial problem. For the first time in 7 years, I felt the old auditor wake up. The man who lived for the details. The man who loved nothing more than a well-documented case against a confident fool. Robert had started a war, assuming I had no army. He didn't realize my first soldier, my most crucial witness, had just knocked on my door. "Carlos," I said, and my voice was different. It was the voice I used to use in boardrooms. Calm, measured, and dangerously certain. "Tell me everything you know about filing a formal complaint." The next few days were a blur of quiet, focused activity. My house, once a tomb of silence, became a war room. Carlos, a true godsend, became my aide-de-camp. It turned out that beneath his easygoing exterior was a sharp, methodical mind. He felt a deep personal responsibility, not just as a man, but as an agent of the postal service he so clearly respected. Our generational gap became a strength. My old-school analog meticulousness, combined with his digital fluency, was a potent force. We started by documenting everything. I sat at my dining room table with a legal pad, the way I used to do when starting a new audit, and I wrote. I wrote about the phone call with Robert, his exact words, his dismissive laughter. I wrote down the date and time. I wrote about my 79th birthday, and every other holiday he had missed. I created a timeline of neglect, a ledger of disrespect. It was painful, like lancing a wound, but it was necessary. Each memory, each slight, was a piece of evidence establishing a pattern of behavior. This wasn't a one-time misunderstanding. It was the culmination of years of escalating entitlement. Carlos, meanwhile, sat opposite me with his laptop, navigating the labyrinthine corridors of the USPI's website. He showed me how to file an official report online. "It's better this way," he explained. "It creates a digital paper trail from the very beginning. No lost papers." "No," he said. She said, "It's all logged." Together we crafted the report. It was concise, professional, and damning. We attached a high-resolution scan of the fraudulent change of address form. Carlos then wrote his own statement, a formal declaration as a witness. He detailed his 5-year history as my letter carrier, his familiarity with my signature, the discrepancy he noted, and his initial conversation with me. He was careful to state only the facts. He was the perfect witness, unimpeachable, with no personal stake other than his professional duty. When he hit the submit button, the sound of the click seemed to echo in the quiet room. It was the first shot fired in a war Robert didn't even know had been declared. With the federal complaint filed and grinding its way through the bureaucratic gears, a new, more chilling thought occurred to me. If Robert was brazen enough to commit a felony for something as mundane as my mail, what else was he doing, or planning to do? The mail was just the gateway. The real prize was my finances. "Carlos," I said, "I need to check my accounts. All of them." This was my territory. I pulled out the old metal box where I kept my important papers. It was a mess of statements, deeds, and policy documents, going back decades. For years, I had just let them accumulate. With Carlos's help, I got online access to my main bank account, my pension fund, and my brokerage account, where I held the stocks I'd carefully accumulated over a lifetime. And there it was. It wasn't a huge, glaring theft. It was worse. It was a slow, steady bleed on my main checking account, the one I had made Robert a cosigner on years ago. Just in case of emergency. There were small, regular transfers, $100 here. And on the shared credit card, the one I'd given him for household emergencies for me. There were charges for high-end restaurants I'd never been to, online stores I'd never heard of, gas stations in the town where he worked. It was death by 1,000 cuts. He had been siphoning money from me for years. Confident I was too out of it to ever check the statements closely. The total was staggering. Tens of thousands of dollars, stolen, not borrowed. The sense of betrayal was so immense it almost buckled my knees. This wasn't just about disrespect anymore. This was a systematic financial assault, perpetrated by my own son. "I need a lawyer," I said, my voice thick. "Not just any lawyer. I need a shark." Carlos nodded grimly. "My aunt," he said. "She had to deal with a real nasty probate fight a few years back. Her lawyer was this young guy, but he was a killer, specialized in elder law and financial exploitation. Let me make a call." The next day I found myself sitting in the sleek, modern office of David Chen. He was younger than I expected, maybe in his mid-30s, with a sharp suit and an even sharper gaze. He listened to my entire story without interruption, his eyes fixed on mine. I laid out the mail fraud, the phone call, the years of neglect, and finally the bank statements I had printed out, with the suspicious charges highlighted. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair and was silent for a full minute. I could see the gears turning behind his eyes. "Mr. Miller," he said finally, his voice a low hum of controlled fury, "what your son has done is not only morally reprehensible, it is a textbook case of elder financial abuse, layered on top of a federal crime. He thinks he's smart. He's not. He's just arrogant, and arrogance creates sloppy work." David laid out a plan with chilling precision. "The USPIS investigation is our nuclear option," he explained. "We let it proceed. Federal investigators are slow, but they are incredibly thorough. They will build a case that will be very difficult for your son to fight. While they do their work, we will do ours. We will conduct a full forensic audit of every single account you have. We will subpoena records. We will build an independent civil case against him that will run parallel to the federal one." His strategy was one of absolute silence. "Your son's greatest weakness right now is his ignorance. David said. "He thinks this is about a dramatic old man. He has no idea that the federal government is looking into him, and he has no idea that you are building a mountain of evidence against him. We will let him live in that ignorance. We will cut off his access, secure your assets, and prepare our attack. You will not answer his calls. You will not respond to his texts or emails. You are a black hole. Let him panic. Let him make mistakes." The first step was to secure the perimeter. We spent the rest of the afternoon on the phone. With David on the line, acting as my legal counsel, we contacted my bank. We had Robert's name immediately removed from all accounts. We changed all my passwords and security questions. We put a verbal password on the account that only I and David knew. The friendly bank manager, a woman I'd known for years, was horrified when David briefly explained the situation. She promised to personally flag my accounts for any unusual activity. Next, we called my brokerage firm and did the same. We went through every asset, every policy. By the end of the day, the financial fortress that was my life's work was once again secure. The secret leaks had been plugged. The quiet siphoning had stopped. The final piece of business was the most painful and the most liberating. David pulled out a fresh set of documents, a new will, a new trust, a new power of attorney, naming David's firm as the temporary agent, to be replaced by my daughter Susan if she was willing. "I don't want to leave him a single dime," I said, the words feeling strange and powerful in my mouth. David nodded. "We will structure this in a way that is airtight. We will specifically and explicitly disinherit Robert and his issue. We will include a clause that anyone who contests the will forfeits any potential claim. He will get nothing. Not a penny, not a photograph, not a single chipped teacup." As I signed the new documents, my hand was firm. The signature was bold and clear. It was the signature of Douglas Miller, an auditor, a father, and a man who was finally, after years of silent suffering, ready to balance the books. The plan was in motion. All we had to do now was wait for the silence to drive my son insane. The first move in our silent war was not a cannon blast, but the quiet slide of an envelope into a mailbox. A week after my meeting with David Chen, he sent a letter to Robert. It was a masterpiece of cold corporate legalese. It was a formal cease and desist, demanding he halt all attempts to manage my affairs. It included a notice of the immediate revocation of the financial power of attorney he had wheedled out of me 5 years prior. And as the coup de grace, it included a meticulously itemized bill for $37,451.22, the total of the unauthorized credit card charges and cash transfers we had uncovered, with copies of the statements attached. There was no emotion in the letter, no anger, no accusation, just a calm, factual demand for repayment within 30 days to avoid civil litigation. Crucially, the letter made no mention of the mail fraud. Not a word about the USPIS. To Robert, this would seem to come out of nowhere, a sudden and inexplicable act of rebellion from a father he considered completely docile. It was a targeted strike designed to confuse and panic him. The first voicemail came 2 days later, at 9:14 a.m. I listened to it on speakerphone with David on the line from his office, coaching me. "Let it ring, Mr. Miller. Let him talk to the machine. The machine is his new confidant." Robert's voice was laced with annoyed confusion. "Dad, it's Rob. I just got a very strange letter from some lawyer. Chen, what is this all about? 37 grand. This is ridiculous. It's some kind of mistake. Call me as soon as you get this." He sounded like a man swatting at a fly, an annoyance he expected to dispatch quickly. We did not call back. The second voicemail arrived that evening at 6:23 p.m. The tone had shifted. The annoyance was curdling into anger. "Dad, I'm serious. Pick up the phone. I've called you 3 times. Who is this David Chen character? Did he trick you into signing something? You can't just cut me off from your accounts. I'm trying to help you. This is completely out of line. Call me. Now, the last two words were a command, the command of a man who was used to being obeyed. Silence was our only reply. The third voicemail, left just before midnight, was pure panic. The mask of the concerned son had slipped entirely, revealing the terrified fraud beneath. "Are you senile? Is that what this is? This lawyer is taking advantage of you. I'm your son, your family. You can't do this to me. To us. I have bills to pay. You know that. I'm coming over tomorrow. We are going to sort this out, face to face." It was no longer a request. It was a threat. "Good," David said calmly over the phone. "Let him come. Don't answer the door. Let the neighbors see the responsible son throwing a tantrum on his elderly father's porch." The next day, right on cue, Robert's expensive German sedan screeched to a halt in front of my house. I watched from behind the living room curtains as he stomped up the walkway. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension check. He banged on the door, a hard, demanding rhythm. "Dad, I know you're in there. Open this door." My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but I stood my ground, a silent sentinel in my own home. I could hear him shouting, his voice tight with fury. "Don't be a child. Don't be a child. We need to talk about this." And then a small miracle occurred. The familiar blue and white truck of the U.S. Postal Service rounded the corner. Carlos pulled up to my mailbox. He got out, saw Robert hammering on my door, and his entire demeanor changed. The friendly mailman was gone, replaced by a calm, authoritative federal employee. He walked up the path, placing himself between Robert and my front door. "Sir," Carlos said, his voice polite but firm, "I think you should probably leave. You're causing a disturbance." Robert whirled around, his face contorted in a mask of rage. He didn't see a man in a uniform. He saw the source of his problems. "You," he spat, pointing a trembling finger at Carlos. "This is your fault. You and your big mouth. You're just a nosy mailman. You stay out of my family's business." It was a catastrophic mistake. Yelling at a mailman on his route is like yelling at a police officer during a traffic stop. It elevates the situation to a whole new level. I saw my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, from across the street, peek out his window. Mrs. Gable, next door, was suddenly very interested in her rose bushes. Robert, the pillar of his community, the successful consultant, was making a public spectacle of himself, bullying a public servant on my front lawn. Carlos didn't flinch. "Sir, this is now my business," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice and step away from the property." Defeated and humiliated, Robert shot one last hateful glare at my front door, and then stormed back to his car, peeling away from the curb with a squeal of tires. He had lost control. He had shown his true colors to the whole neighborhood, and he had done it all on his own. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of a hunter in a blind, waiting for his prey to walk into the trap. The trap sprung 10 days later. David had warned me it was coming. The USPIS moves at its own pace, but when it moves, it is decisive. A special agent from the inspection service had called David, as my legal representative, to inform him that their initial investigation had found sufficient cause to proceed. An official letter was being sent. It arrived at Robert's sprawling suburban house on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't in a plain envelope. It was a crisp, formal letter bearing the official seal of the United States Postal Inspection Service. It informed him, in no uncertain terms, that he was the subject of a federal investigation into felony mail fraud, mail theft, and identity theft. It quoted the specific federal statutes he was suspected of violating. It mentioned potential penalties that included up to 5 years in federal prison per offense, and fines well into the six figures. It concluded by stating that an agent would be in contact to schedule a formal interview, and that he was strongly advised to retain legal counsel. The bottom had just fallen out of my son's perfectly curated world. The small, private problem of a lawyer's letter had metastasized into a public federal nightmare. The question, "Who's going to care?" now had a terrifyingly concrete answer. The full weight and power of the United States government. The game had changed, and he was no longer a player. The shockwave from that federal letter radiated outwards, fracturing the foundations of the life Robert had so carefully constructed. The first cracks appeared in his marriage. His wife, Christine, was a woman for whom appearances were everything. Their social standing in their wealthy enclave was her life's work. I didn't have to imagine her reaction. It was a desperate Hail Mary pass from a man who had ignored her for the better part of a decade. It backfired spectacularly. Susan called me the next day. It was the first time she had initiated a call in at least 2 years. Her voice was hesitant at first, then filled with a kind of weary anger. "Dad, it's me," Robbie called. He was babbling, something about mail and lawyers and the government. He wasn't making any sense. "He said you were trying to ruin him. What is going on?" For the first time in a very long time, I had a real conversation with my daughter. I didn't yell or accuse. I just calmly, factually, told her everything. I told her about the change of address form, the forged signature, Carlos's discovery, the stolen money, and the letter from the USPIS. I just laid the facts out on the table. There was a long silence on her end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Oh, Dad," she whispered, "I am so sorry. I knew he was selfish, but I never thought. He always was the golden child, wasn't he? Mom and you gave him everything. I guess he just thought it would never stop." She paused. "I'm sorry I wasn't there more. I let him push me away. I just got tired of being invisible next to him. A bridge I thought had been burned to ashes was suddenly tentatively being rebuilt. "It's not your fault, Susie," I said, using her childhood nickname without thinking. "You had your own life to build. I'm just glad to hear your voice." Susan became an unexpected source of intelligence. She told me Christine was apoplectic. Her friends were starting to ask questions. Whispers were starting at the tennis club. The perfect family was beginning to look like a lie. The golden child's pedestal was crumbling. This new alliance with Susan further isolated Robert, leaving him on an island of his own making. The calls and texts started again, but their tone had undergone a complete transformation. The anger and condescension were gone, replaced by a desperate, pleading whine. His wife, Christine, even called me herself one afternoon. "Douglas," she began, her voice dripping with a false sweetness that set my teeth on edge. "It's Christine. I am just calling because I am so worried about this whole misunderstanding. Robert is a wreck. He loves you so much. He was only ever trying to help." I remained silent, letting her talk. Her voice started to crack, the fake sympathy giving way to raw panic. "You have to stop this. Think of your grandchildren. Think of what this will do to their future, to our reputation. You'll ruin Robert. You'll ruin us. Please just call them off. Tell them it was a mistake." It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. She didn't care about me. She didn't care about what Robert had done. She cared about her reputation and her money. She cared about the consequences. The us she was trying to save did not include me. I held the phone, listening to her practice sobs, and I felt nothing. Not pity, not anger, just a profound, sad emptiness. They were who they were. It had taken a federal investigation for me to finally see them clearly. With David's coaching ringing in my ears, I simply and quietly hung up the phone. The power shift was complete. They were no longer the ones in control. The silence, once my prison, was now my castle, and its walls were impenetrable. The final act took place not in my home or Robert's, but in the sterile, neutral territory of David Chen's conference room. Robert's lawyer had requested the meeting. It was a plea for a truce. I walked in with David at my side. Carlos had insisted on driving me, just for support, and was waiting in the lobby, a quiet guardian angel in a polo shirt. Robert and Christine were already seated at the long, polished table. The change in them was shocking. Robert, who had always carried himself with an air of unassailable arrogance, was slumped in his chair. His expensive suit seemed to hang off him. His face was pale and drawn. Christine sat ramrod straight beside him, her face a tight mask of terror, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. They looked like defendants in a trial that had already been lost. Their lawyer, a tired-looking man in his 60s, began the proceedings. He spoke of deep regrets and terrible misjudgments. He talked about Robert's misguided sense of concern for my welfare. He painted a picture of a loving son who had simply gone about helping his aging father in the wrong way. It was a pathetic, transparent performance. Robert, when prompted, mumbled a stilted apology, his eyes fixed on the tabletop. "I'm sorry, Dad. I never meant for any of this to happen." Then came the offer. They would pay back every cent of the $37,000 immediately. They would sign any document, agree to anything if I would just make one phone call. A call to the assistant U.S. attorney in charge of the case to explain that this was all just a big family misunderstanding. David let them finish their desperate pitch. The room fell silent, the air thick with their hope. David leaned forward slightly and slid a thick bound folder across the table. It landed in front of Robert's lawyer with a soft, heavy thud. "The time for misunderstandings is over," David said, his voice as cold and hard as the polished table. "That folder contains our full forensic audit of Mr. Miller's accounts, a log of your client's harassing phone calls, and sworn affidavits from two of Mr. Miller's neighbors regarding your client's behavior on his front lawn. It also contains a copy of the witness statement submitted to federal investigators by Carlos Ramirez, the postal employee who initially uncovered the fraud. The color drained from Robert's face. He had no idea we had so much. David continued, his voice relentless. The federal investigation is of course out of our hands now. The United States government is the aggrieved party. My client cannot call them off. However, he paused, letting the word hang in the air. Mr. Miller's testimony as the victim is of course central to their case, and he is still deciding how he wishes to characterize your son's motives to the prosecutor. This was it, the moment of reckoning. All eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath and looked directly at my son. Truly looked at him. For the first time in years, I saw not a man but a spoiled, frightened boy who had finally been caught. My voice when I spoke was quiet, but it filled the room. You asked me a question on the phone, Robbie, I began. You asked me a question on the phone, Robbie, I began. You laughed, and you asked, who's going to care? You stood in my house for years, looking at me, but you never saw me. You saw a nuisance. You saw a bank account. You saw a problem to be managed. You didn't want to manage my life. You wanted to own it. I let that sink in. Then I looked at David. Tell them the terms. David laid it out with surgical precision. I would agree, if asked by the prosecutor, to characterize Robert's actions as stemming from a place of profound and panicked error in judgment, rather than pure criminal malice. It was a carefully worded half-truth that might persuade the prosecutor to offer a plea deal that avoided prison time in favor of probation, community service, and a substantial fine. It was a gift, and we all knew it. In exchange, David said, his eyes locking with Robert's, your client will sign this. He produced a second, even thicker document. This is an irrevocable legal agreement. In it, you will relinquish any and all future claims to your father's estate. You will renounce your role as executor of his will. You will forfeit any inheritance for yourself and for your children in perpetuity. You will also agree to a permanent restraining order forbidding you from coming within 500 feet of your father or his property. You will be completely and utterly excised from his life. Christine let out a horrified gasp. This was the real sentence. Not jail, not a fine. Erasure. The end of the gravy train. The end of the inheritance that was supposed to secure their future. Robert just stared at the document, his face a ruin. He had two choices: sign away his future inheritance, or face a federal trial with a very real possibility of a prison sentence that would destroy his life anyway. I had given him the illusion of a choice, but in reality there was none. He had built his own cage, and I was simply locking the door. His hand shaking, Robert picked up the pen. He signed his name. His signature, once so confident, was now the spidery scrawl of a defeated man. The charade was over. The books were finally balanced. A few months have passed since that day in the lawyer's office. It's autumn now. The air is crisp, and the leaves on the big maple tree in my front yard are turning a brilliant, fiery red. I'm sitting on my porch, a cup of hot coffee warming my hands. Life is different now. The silence in my house is no longer a heavy, suffocating blanket. It's a peaceful, comfortable quiet. The quiet of a life that is finally my own. Carlos's mail truck pulls up, right on time. He brings my letters to the porch and sits with me for a few minutes, just as he always does. We're not just a mailman and an old man anymore. We're friends. True friends. He tells me his abuela finally taught him the secret to her flan. It's a dash of cinnamon, and I tell him about the phone call I had with my granddaughter last night. Susan and I talk every few days now. She's helping me plan a trip to come visit her and her family in Oregon for Thanksgiving. It will be my first time on a plane in 15 years. The thought is both terrifying and thrilling. I've started a new will with David's help. Susan is the executor now. The bulk of my estate will go to her and her children. But I've also made sure to set up a trust for Robert's kids, for their education. It will be managed by a third party, ensuring their parents can never touch a dime of it. The children are innocent in all of this. And in a special addendum, I've left a significant bequest to a national charity that provides legal aid to victims of elder abuse. It was Carlos's suggestion. I heard through Susan what happened to Robert. He took the plea deal. He avoided prison, but just barely. He got 5 years of probation, a $200,000 fine, and 1,000 hours of community service. His professional licenses were suspended. He and Christine had to sell their big house to pay the legal fees and the fine. Their perfect life, built on my money, and his arrogance imploded under the weight of its own lies. He got what he deserved. It wasn't a victory I celebrated. It was just a consequence, the natural and unavoidable result of his own actions. It was never about the money. Not really. It was about being seen. It was about being counted as a human being. My son and his wife, they looked at me and saw a relic, a faded photograph from a bygone era. They thought my age meant I was weak, that my loneliness meant I was powerless. They mistook my silence for surrender. But they were wrong. Silence isn't always a retreat. Sometimes it's a place where you gather your strength, where you check your ammunition, where you wait for the perfect moment to make your stand. They committed a crime, but their real sin was arrogance. They thought no one was watching. They thought no one would care. But somebody did. A good young man named Carlos, who still believed in doing the right thing. A sharp lawyer named David, who believed in justice for the vulnerable. And me. An old man who had forgotten for a little while who he used to be. My son's single, contemptuous question, "Who's going to care?" was the spark that lit the fire. I just wanted to make sure he finally got an answer. What do you think? Was the final agreement too harsh, or was it exactly what he deserved? I'd be interested to read your thoughts in the comments below. And if you have a story about a time someone underestimated you, please share it. These stories remind us that we're not alone. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories like this one. It helps more than you know. Thank you for listening.